Hi, I'm Sarah. My family laughed when I brought a single dad to my sister's wedding, where my ex stood waiting, smirking like he owned the room. They thought it was funny to seat me by the kitchen doors while he toasted his new life. They thought I'd stay quiet while they erased me again. But they didn't know I was done letting them bury the past they were so afraid would crawl back. Have you ever let your family humiliate you just to keep the peace? Before we dive in, tell me where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments. Let's see who's ready to hear. How this wedding turned into the reckoning they never saw coming. I was halfway through folding laundry when the call came. My mother's name blinked on the screen, and I felt that tightness behind my ribs, the one that made me stand straighter without meaning to. I didn't answer right away. I watched the phone buzz, thinking if I waited, maybe she'd hang up. She didn't. When I picked up, her voice was already moving, clipped and honeyed, in that way only she could pull off. Sarah, it's time you showed your face for the family. Jessica's wedding is in 2 weeks, and of course you'll be there. I swallowed, pressing the phone between my ear and shoulder while I kept folding a dish towel, the soft cotton suddenly rough in my fingers. You're not really asking, are you? She let out a laugh, short and sharp. Don't start, honey. It's important for the family to look united. You know how people talk at the country club. I could picture her then standing in her spotless kitchen, the same white marble countertops that used to chill my feet on cold mornings when I was a kid, wiping down a surface that didn't need wiping. She always said things like that, as if her decisions were a kindness I should be grateful for. Fine, I said, before she could say more. She moved on to reminding me of the dress code, the time, the flowers, as if I'd been part of the planning instead of finding out last minute like an afterthought. When she hung up, I sat on the edge of my couch, the folded laundry in a crooked pile beside me, and I stared at nothing for a long moment. In that silence, a memory pulled at me uninvited. I was 12, standing in the hallway before Jessica's dance recital, clutching a flower I'd picked from the neighbor's yard because I couldn't afford one from the store. Mom had looked at me, frowned at the wrinkled petals, and told me to try not to embarrass Jessica. I had smiled anyway and clapped the hardest when Jessica took her bow. The next day, Jessica got a new dress for being so perfect, and I got to help wash dishes. It was early spring now in Chicago, but the air still bit when I stepped outside later that day, pulling my coat tighter around me as I walked to my car. The drive to my parents' house in Winnetka was familiar, lined with budding oaks and manicured lawns. The sky, that soft, pale blue that always made me feel like the day was waiting for me to prove something. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Jessica's car, a gleaming white Mercedes parked neatly beside Dad's Range Rover. I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in, breathing out before forcing myself to get out. Inside, the smell of pot roast and rosemary potatoes wrapped around me like a trap. Dad was in his leather recliner, half watching the Bulls game, while Mom and Jessica stood in the kitchen, laughing softly. Jessica turned when she saw me, her smile too bright, too wide. Look who finally made it, she sang, her eyes scanning me, pausing on my scuffed flats before meeting my eyes again. We were just talking about the final details. The dinner felt like sitting at a table where everyone else had read the script but me. Mom fussed over the napkins. Jessica rattled off the guest list partners from her law firm, Brad's Harvard buddies family from both coasts. I nodded, chewing each bite carefully, trying not to let my jaw clench. Then Dad chuckled, shaking his head as he wiped his mouth with a napkin. You know we still got to find someone willing to sit next to Sarah at the wedding. We can't have her sitting there like a sad puppy all alone. The table erupted in laughter, even Mom letting out a high, thin giggle. Jessica covered her mouth, eyes glinting. Oh, Dad, stop, she said, but she didn't mean it. I froze, my hand tightening around my water glass, the cold seeping into my skin. They kept going, throwing out names of guys from high school, old neighbors laughing about my bad luck, my picky taste, Until Dad, in his chuckling way, said the name that made my stomach drop. Maybe Ryan will sit with you again. Huh. Now that would be a sight. The laughter felt like shards. Ryan, the man I had loved, who had chosen Jessica's best friend over me, who would be at the wedding standing near the altar, as Brad's best man, smiling as if he hadn't once promised me forever. I set my glass down carefully, afraid it would slip from my hand. The room was still buzzing with laughter, but it felt like I was underwater, watching them through thick, shifting glass. "Excuse me," I managed, pushing back my chair. I walked down the hallway past the photos of Jessica's graduations, her smiling with my parents at Gala's trophies from her debate team days, while my own moments were packed in a box somewhere left behind when I moved out. I stopped in front of the hallway mirror, the one Mom used to check her lipstick before church. My reflection stared back at me, pale, tired, but there was something in my eyes I hadn't seen in a while. A flicker, small but steady. They could laugh, but they wouldn't laugh forever. I pressed my fingertips against the cool glass, leaning in, until I could see the tiny lines around my eyes, the proof that I had lived, that I had survived every careless word, every dismissive laugh. Your worth is not defined by their opinions. Oh, the thought came quietly, but it settled in me like a promise. I turned away from the mirror, straightening my shoulders as I walked back toward the dining room. Their laughter was still echoing, but it felt different now, like a noise I could let bounce off me without sinking in. They wouldn't laugh again. I left their house that night with the sound of their laughter still sticking to my skin like smoke. Driving home on Lakeshore Drive, the glow of the dashboard felt too bright, too cold against the dark stretch of road that led back to my apartment in Lincoln Park. I kept hearing Dad's chuckle, Mom's thin giggle, Jessica's bright, polished laugh slicing through me. It was late when I finally pulled into my parking spot, the streetlight flickering overhead. As I shut the car door, I told myself, one more step then another, until I was inside, locking the door behind me. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, how they looked at me like I was a joke that never grew old. I lay there with my hands folded over my stomach, feeling the quiet determination I promised myself shift into something that felt almost like fear. Morning came, and with it the usual rhythm of coffee brewing, the hum of the fridge, the light slicing through the blinds across the kitchen floor. I stood by the counter, phone in hand, reading the family group text over and over. Jessica had sent a photo of her wedding shoes, pearl Jimmy Choos, she called classy but not too flashy. And Mom replied with heart emojis telling her how proud she was. Then came the message from my cousin Ashley. Does Sarah even have a +1 LOL? The others reacted with thumbs up and laughing faces. I locked the screen, pressing the phone against my chest, closing my eyes. I didn't want to cry again. Not for them. I took a deep breath, letting the air settle in my lungs before letting it go slow. I thought of Marcus then, the way he sat quietly during the support group at the community center, his daughter Lily coloring at his feet while he offered coffee to an older woman who couldn't stop crying about losing her husband. Marcus never rushed anyone. His calm was the kind that made you want to sit closer just to breathe in some of it for yourself. We'd spoken briefly after meetings, sharing stories we didn't mean to share. I had told him in a low voice about losing myself trying to be who they wanted me to be. He had nodded, saying, I get it. After Emma died, I didn't know who I was supposed to be anymore. Lily pulled me back. Holding my phone? Now I thought about him, about his quiet strength, and how he never made me feel like I had to shrink myself to fit the room. I opened the message app, my thumb hovering over his name. My heart was loud in my ears, telling me this was stupid, that I would look desperate, that he would say no, and I would have to see that pity in his eyes the next time we crossed paths. I typed, erased, typed again. Then I let my fingers move, letting the words come out exactly as they were. Would you be willing to come as my date to a family wedding? It's complicated. I stared at the message, reading it once, twice. My thumb hovered over the send button, and I pressed it before I could change my mind. The message whooshed away, leaving a silence so thick I could barely breathe. I turned the phone off, placing it face down on the counter, stepping back as if it might bite. I spent the rest of the morning trying to distract myself, folding laundry, scrubbing the bathroom sink, wiping down the kitchen counters until they shone. Each time I reached for my phone, I pulled my hand back, telling myself I would wait until the afternoon, then the evening, then maybe tomorrow. But around 3:00 in the afternoon, I turned the phone on, telling myself I just needed to check the weather. The notification was there immediately, his name lighting up the screen. What day? Tell me what you need from me. I sank into the chair at the kitchen table, the message blurring for a moment as tears I didn't expect pressed into my eyes. Relief and fear twisted together, the fear of what I was asking, what it might mean, what it might cost him, cost me. Was I using him? Was I becoming exactly what they accused me of? Someone desperate to drag a man into the mess of my family just to save face? I closed my eyes, breathing in the soft scent of the lemon cleaner, still lingering in the air. A quiet voice inside one I'd tried to ignore for too long whispered, "It's time to stop letting them define your worth." I typed back, "Next Saturday. I'll take care of everything. I'll handle what we'll say if they ask questions." The 3 dots appeared blinking, pausing, disappearing, and then coming back before his reply landed. "You don't have to pretend to be less than you are even for them." I stared at his message, letting the words settle into the space around me, letting them find a home somewhere deeper than I usually let words go. I stood up, walking to the mirror in the hallway, looking at myself, really looking. I saw the woman they thought was a joke, but also the woman who had learned to stand up after every fall. The woman who was tired of shrinking herself so others could feel big. "Next Saturday," I whispered to my reflection, the hint of a smile at the edge of my lips. Let them see. The morning of the wedding came too quickly, creeping in, with the pale light that slipped through the slats of my blinds. I woke before dawn, the Chicago sky still gray, the air holding that cool hush before the world fully wakes up. I pulled the navy dress from the closet, the one I'd spent an hour convincing myself to buy last week at Nordstrom, telling myself it was for me, not for them. Standing in front of the mirror, I held the dress against me for a moment, breathing in deeply, letting the fabric settle over my shoulders and down to my knees. "This isn't for them," I whispered, but the words stuck in my throat, heavy and uncertain. The truth was, I wanted to feel seen, not by them, but by myself. I zipped it up, smoothing it over my hips, brushing off a thread that clung to the hem. The mirror showed a woman who looked put together, but inside a slow thrum of dread worked through me, settling behind my ribs. I pressed my palm against my stomach, grounding myself in the quiet of my small kitchen, letting the steady rhythm of my breathing push back the swirl of doubt rising in my chest. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me from my thoughts. The screen lit up with a message from Jessica. "Don't embarrass us today," it read, followed by a photo in the family group chat. Jessica in her white rehearsal dress standing beside Brad, with Ryan, my ex, right there, grinning hand on the groom's shoulder. The air in the room seemed to thin out, and I reached for the back of the nearest chair, gripping it until my knuckles whitened. Ryan, the man who once told me I was too much work, who laughed with Jessica in the hallway while I packed up my life into cardboard boxes, the man who moved on without looking back, without once acknowledging the hollow he left behind. I let the phone slip from my hand onto the table, the screen going dark as I slid down the wall, sitting on the floor with my knees pulled up to my chest. The tears came before I could stop them, hot and silent, carving paths down my cheeks. It wasn't just Ryan, it was all of them. The way they made me feel like I was always the extra, the leftover, the afterthought they barely tolerated. "You're overreacting," Dad's voice echoed in my head, the words he'd thrown at me during every argument. don't make a scene, Mom would add, smoothing down her blouse, avoiding my eyes. Jessica laughing softly. You're just too sensitive, Sarah. I didn't want to be this woman anymore, the one who sat on the floor of her kitchen, letting them decide who she was allowed to be. But right then, it felt like everything I had built in myself was cracking. A buzz on the table pulled me back. I wiped at my eyes with the heel of my hand, reaching for the phone. Marcus's name lit up the screen. We'll go on your terms. You lead. I'll follow. I stared at his message, reading it over and over, letting the steadiness of it wrap around the jagged pieces inside me. Marcus, who owed me nothing, who had every reason to walk away from the mess of my family, was willing to stand beside me even when I couldn't promise him it would be easy. I pulled in a shaky breath, typing back, "Thank you. Today I'm done letting them pretend I don't exist. See you there." I turned off my phone, setting it down gently on the counter, as if it were something fragile I couldn't afford to break. I stood up, moving around the kitchen, gathering my purse, sliding in a small compact, my keys, a packet of tissues. I glanced at the clock on the microwave, the soft green numbers telling me I had just enough time to leave without rushing. Before I left, I stopped in front of the mirror one more time, checking the dress, adjusting a strand of hair that fell across my forehead. My reflection looked back at me, tired but steady, a quiet fierceness in my eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. "They won't break me today," I whispered, pressing my lips together, holding on to that promise. Marcus pulled up in front of my building in his sensible Honda, his daughter's car seat visible in the back. The morning air was clean, the promise of a clear sky above us, but I felt the weight of what was ahead pressing against my shoulders. He didn't say much as I climbed in, but he gave me a small nod, the kind that said, "You've got this." I managed a thin smile, settling into the seat, letting the low hum of Lakeshore Drive beneath us steady the drum of nerves rattling in my chest. The drive to the Drake Hotel felt longer than it was, each mile a quiet battle inside my head, trying not to picture Ryan's smirk, trying not to hear my mother's voice telling me, "Just don't start anything today." I pressed my lips together, glancing out the window at Lake Michigan, the water choppy and gray, the world moving on even if I felt stuck. We pulled into the valet circle of the Drake. Cars already lined up, people stepping out in pressed dresses and suits greeting each other with bright, hollow smiles. I opened the door, stepping out carefully, brushing down the navy dress, as if it would protect me, as if it would make me invisible to the stares I could already feel. Marcus came around, offering his arm, and for a second I hesitated. Then I slipped my hand into the crook of his elbow, letting him lead me toward the entrance, the chatter of a distant laughter spilling out onto the Michigan Avenue sidewalk. My heart was pounding, but I lifted my chin, telling myself this was just another room, just another door I had to walk through. Inside, the warmth hit me, mixed with the scent of roses and polished wood, and I saw them, my family, clustered together near the bar. Jessica, in her dress radiant and glowing, her hand wrapped around Brad's arm, and beside them Ryan. He looked the same and different, his hair shorter, the same easy grin on his face as he laughed at something Jessica said, ignoring the world around him. He turned, eyes sweeping past me like I was air, before he leaned in to whisper something to Jessica, who glanced at me, smirked, and turned away. It was a small thing, a flick of her eyes, but it cut deeper than I expected, reopening wounds I thought I had stitched shut years ago. Marcus leaned down, voice low. "Remember, you're here for you, not them." I swallowed, forcing a nod, tightening my grip on my purse so they wouldn't see my hands shake. An usher approached, holding a stack of place cards, his smile polite but distant. "Sarah Mitchell," he asked, confirming, before handing me a card with my name, guiding us through the Gold Coast room. My eyes followed the direction of his hand, expecting to see a table near the front where family was gathered. But he kept walking, weaving us around groups of laughing guests, past the bar, past the decorated tables with centerpieces of white orchids and candles, until we stopped by a small table tucked against the wall near the swinging kitchen doors. I stared at the table, the clatter of trays and the whoosh of the kitchen door almost drowning out the pounding in my ears. I turned to look back, seeing Ryan's name card at the family's table near the dance floor, surrounded by the people who once called me theirs. A cold laugh bubbled up inside me, sharp and bitter, but I swallowed it down, refusing to let it out. My mother passed by, pretending to adjust a centerpiece on a nearby table, leaning in close enough for only me to hear. "Just stay out of the way, Sarah. Let today be about Jessica." I clenched my jaw, looking her straight in the eye, but she was already turning away, a satisfied curve to her lips as she returned to her circle. Marcus watched her walk off before looking at me, his eyes searching mine. "You sure you want to stay?" I breathed in, slowly pressing my lips together, forcing back the sting in my eyes. "They think I'll run," I whispered, shaking my head as I placed my purse on the chair, pulling it out to sit down. "I won't." I sat back straight, folding my hands in my lap as the kitchen door swung open and closed beside me, sending gusts of warm air scented with garlic and prime rib. My hands trembled under the tablecloth hidden from the world, but I kept my face steady, watching them across the room, seeing the way they laughed, the way they pretended I wasn't there. But I was there. I was sitting at their wedding at a table by the kitchen, the family joke they thought I didn't see, and I was still here. Marcus sat beside me, his hand resting on the table close enough that I could feel the quiet strength radiating from him. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. His presence was enough, reminding me that sometimes the only power you need is to stay, to refuse to disappear, to let them see you, even when they wish you weren't there. The wedding coordinator's soft voice over the mic cut through the clatter of forks and polite laughter, asking for everyone's attention. I shifted in my seat by the kitchen doors, the air warm from the swinging door that let out puffs of garlic and roasted vegetables each time it opened. I could see my mother leaning toward the coordinator, whispering something with that familiar tight smile that never touched her eyes. Marcus's hand rested near mine, on the table, not touching, but close enough that I felt grounded. I inhaled, slowly smoothing the fabric of my dress across my knees, reminding myself I was still here, still breathing, despite how small they wanted me to feel. I watched Ryan stand his hand, adjusting the tie at his throat, eyes scanning the crowd as he took the microphone. A few older relatives clapped, calling out, "That's our boy," while Jessica beamed at him like he was made of gold. My stomach tightened. My gaze dropped, but I forced it back up. If I could sit here, I could watch him too. "Good afternoon, everyone." Ryan began, his voice carrying easily over the hushed room. He was always good at commanding attention, even when he didn't deserve it. "I'm honored to stand here beside Jessica and Brad as they start this journey together." He let the silence hang for a moment, his smile stretching as if he were savoring every pair of eyes fixed on him. Then his gaze flicked across the room and landed on me before sliding away like I was nothing. "I've always believed," Ryan continued, "that the people who truly matter in your life will stay. They'll be there when you're down, and they'll stick around when you get back up." He chuckled, the kind of easy laugh that used to make me drop my guard. "And well, some people just can't let go of the past, you know." A ripple of laughter moved through the family's table. A few cousins covered their mouths, pretending not to look at me. Jessica nudged Ryan's arm with a laugh, shaking her head as if to say, "Stop it." But she didn't mean it. He went on, "But that's family, right? No matter how many mistakes we make, family is there to help us move forward, to remind us what's worth keeping and what's worth leaving behind." Another wave of laughter. My mother leaned over to Aunt Carol, loud enough that I heard, "She was never good enough for him anyway." The words landed like a slap, heat rising up my neck to my ears. My hands tightened under the table, knuckles white, as I stared at the empty water glass in front of me. Memories came back sharp and fast. Ryan calling me too much while I packed boxes. The way he laughed with Jessica on the porch while I drove away with everything I owned in the backseat of a borrowed car. The way I kept hoping even after that he'd call and say he was wrong. Marcus's hand moved covering mine, firm and warm, and he leaned closer, whispering, "Look at me, not him." I did. I turned away from Ryan's smug face, away from the snickers and the whispers, and I looked at Marcus. His eyes were steady, seeing me in a way that didn't ask me to shrink. I blinked rapidly, pulling in a breath as my chest tightened. Ryan's voice droned on in the background, talking about fresh starts and letting go. I could hear the forced wisdom in his tone, the fake sincerity layered over the barbs he threw for their entertainment. Something inside me shifted. The shame that usually made me want to disappear turned into something hotter, clearer. I realized, sitting there with my hands trembling under Marcus's, that it wasn't just Ryan who betrayed me. It was this whole room that fed on the idea of me as the family embarrassment, the failure who never lived up to their script. I glanced back at the family's table, seeing their faces, the pity, the smirks, the way they pretended I wasn't there. My mother's eyes met mine for a brief second, before she looked away satisfied, as if she had won something. Marcus squeezed my hand. "You don't have to let them do this to you," he murmured so softly it was almost a breath. I held his gaze, the noise around me fading for a moment. My pulse steadied, slow and deliberate, and I nodded once more to myself, then to him. As Ryan wrapped up raising his glass for a toast, I kept my spine straight, lifting my chin. He looked around, pausing, letting his eyes drift past me one last time, as if to confirm I was still in my place, still small. "Here's to letting go." Ryan finished, his smile sharp, "and to the people who help us see who we really are." Glasses clinked. Laughter rose again. But I didn't lift my glass. I didn't laugh. I didn't shrink. I sat there, letting the warmth of Marcus's hand anchor me, letting the noise pass through me. And I knew with a quiet certainty that was stronger than any rage that I was done letting them tell me who I was. Then Marcus stood up, and the room fell silent. The moment Marcus pushed back his chair, the soft rustle of his suit against the chair's fabric seemed louder than the entire room's chatter. Conversations that had picked up after Ryan's speech died one by one, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. The only sounds left were the clink of a glass someone forgot to put down, and the faint hum of the air conditioning. He didn't rush. Marcus stood fully, his height suddenly undeniable, in the crowded reception hall, and walked around the table past me to the microphone at the center. My breath caught when he glanced at me, a calm nod that said, "I've got this." The quiet confidence in that single look steadied the chaos inside me. I tried to keep my eyes on him, but I could feel them all looking, my mother's tight-lipped disapproval, Jessica's smug tilt of her chin, Ryan's confusion turning to annoyance. The wedding planner hovered near the corner, glancing at her clipboard, unsure if she should step in. Marcus adjusted the mic slightly, tapping it once. "I won't take much of your time," he began, his voice even low, the kind of tone that made people lean in without realizing they were doing it. A murmur traveled across the tables, the kind that comes when people know something real is about to be said, even if they don't want to hear it. Marcus didn't fill the space with nervous laughter or filler words. He waited, letting the room settle, letting them realize they were about to listen. "I don't know many of you," he continued, scanning the faces with a polite, steady look that stopped just before it could be called a stare. "I wasn't here for all the years you shared all the stories you've told or the memories you've made, but I have learned something about families in my life, and it's this. It's easy to laugh at someone when you forget who was there holding you up when you were falling apart." A ripple went through the room. I saw Aunt Carol shift uncomfortably, looking down at her lap. My mother's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. Ryan's smirk faltered, the corner of his mouth twitching before he masked it with a sip from his glass. Marcus continued, I've learned that some debts aren't settled with words. They're repaid in the way you live your life after someone's helped you stand back up. Silence fell so heavy I could hear the tick of someone's watch. I kept my gaze on Marcus, feeling every word sink into the parts of me that had spent years doubting my worth, questioning if I deserved to be heard or seen. My mother muttered something sharp under her breath to the woman next to her, but she didn't dare raise her voice. Not now, not when every head was turned to Marcus. He didn't share details. He didn't need to. His words were enough a reminder that there were stories behind every laugh, every dismissal, every whispered judgment that the family passed around like cheap champagne. He made them remember without saying my name that I existed. I stand beside people, he said, pausing as his eyes met mine across the room, who never needed to prove themselves to a room that's already decided who they are without ever asking. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let it out. The release sharp my chest loosening in a way it hadn't in years. The pressure of being the family disappointment, the quiet shame of being the one left behind, started to ease under the steady truth of his words. Ryan set his glass down harder than necessary, the sound sharp, but he didn't say a word. His face tightened, jaw shifting as he looked away, a flush rising up his neck. Marcus nodded once, stepping back from the mic, his shoulders straight. His gaze calm as he returned to the table. Every eye in the room followed him, unsure whether to clap to laugh or to pretend nothing had happened. The music resumed softer now, as if the room was trying to find its footing again. As Marcus sat back down, his hand found mine under the table firm, warm, a silent promise that he was there not just for the moment, but for the parts of me that had learned to shrink to keep the peace. I looked at him, and he gave me the smallest, softest smile. For the first time in that room, I didn't feel small. But the wedding was far from over. The DJ shifted songs from soft jazz to a slow, pulsing melody, the kind that invited couples to the floor under the warm glow of string lights. Marcus looked at me with that quiet question in his eyes, his hand outstretched, waiting. For a moment, I wanted to refuse to stay at the table and avoid another scene, but I could feel the air around us shifting, feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing against my skin. I nodded, slipping my hand into his, letting him guide me to the dance floor. My heels clicked softly against the polished wood, each step echoing louder in my head than in the room. We found a spot near the edge, close enough to feel part of the moment, but not so close that I couldn't escape if I needed to. His hand settled at my waist, steady, warm, and I placed mine on his shoulder, letting him lead. I tried to focus on the music, the rhythm, the way Marcus's breath stayed even calm, pulling me into a space that felt safer than the judgmental glances I felt pressing against my back. As we moved, I caught sight of my cousin Brittany weaving through the couples. She wore a dress that shimmered under the lights, her lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I felt my stomach tighten, a flicker of unease, making my steps falter. Marcus noticed his hand tightening slightly, reminding me to breathe. Brittany stopped near us, pretending to adjust her bracelet, as she leaned in with a too-sweet grin. "Oh, Sarah, you look lovely tonight," she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my voice level, refusing to shrink under her gaze. Her smile sharpened, and she stepped closer, dropping her voice so only I could hear, "You're really going to pretend you belong here?" Before I could respond, she stepped back, raising her voice. "Oh, remember when Ryan paid your rent for 6 months, when you couldn't keep up? Those were rough times, huh?" The music seemed to warp the notes, stretching thin as gasps and low whispers filled the space around us. Heads turned to eyes flicking between me and Brittany, judgment heavy in the air like a storm gathering right over my head. I felt the floor sway, the lights blurring as shame clawed up my throat. Marcus's hand pressed against my back, grounding me as I struggled to keep breathing. His other hand found mine, squeezing gently, a silent promise that he was still there. Memories slammed into me. Nights. I sat in my tiny apartment lights, off to save on the electric bill, counting coins to buy enough gas to get to work. The months I worked double shifts sending money to help cover my father's medical bills, while pretending to the world that everything was fine. Ryan offering to cover rent for a few months, and me insisting on paying him back, which I did. Every last cent quietly, without letting anyone know I had ever accepted help. The lie Brittany had just dropped into this room was twisted malicious, turning a moment of survival into an accusation of weakness. I felt the burn of tears, but I blinked them back, focusing on Marcus's eyes, the calm strength there pulling me back from the edge. Brittany tilted her head, her smile cold. We all need a little charity sometimes, don't we? The music kept playing a mockery of the moment, but I could feel the hush around us, people waiting to see if I would crumble. I took a breath, steadying myself, and turned to face her fully. Funny how you know so much about debts that were paid back in full while you're still living off your trust fund, I said, my voice clear, carrying just enough to reach the ears waiting for a spectacle. Brittany's face paled, the smirk slipping, as she glanced around, realizing the crowd was no longer on her side. The whispers changed, shifting into something sharper, uncomfortable, no longer about me, but about her. Marcus didn't say a word, but I felt his approval in the slight nod he gave me, his hand remaining firm at my back, letting me stand on my own, but reminding me I wasn't alone. The space around us cleared as the song continued, couples stepping away, sensing the weight of the confrontation, leaving me and Brittany in the center, the lights above us flickering as if holding their breath. I kept my gaze on her, refusing to look away, refusing to let her see any crack in my resolve. The silence stretched the only sound, the muted thump of the bass, the distant clinking of glasses as the rest of the room tried to pretend they weren't hanging. On every word, every breath. Brittany's mouth opened like she wanted to retort, to claw back control, but nothing came out. She turned away, muttering under her breath as she pushed past a group of onlookers who quickly stepped aside. The moment settled, the tension shifting into something else. Something like respect, or at least the end of the ridicule they had thrown at me for too long. I felt taller, the shame lifting off my shoulders, replaced by a quiet defiance that settled into my bones. Marcus leaned in, his voice low. You handled that. I managed a small smile, letting the weight of what had just happened sink in. Yeah, I said, my voice steady, stronger than I remembered it being in years. I did. But Brittany wasn't finished. She stepped back into the circle of light, spilling from the chandeliers, her smile sharp enough to cut glass as she lifted her phone for everyone to see. The music had barely started again, the crowd still restless from what had just happened, whispers clinging to the edges of the dance floor like smoke. Since we're sharing truths tonight, Brittany said, her voice sweet but heavy with threat, let's play a little memory game, shall we? My heart slammed so hard, I thought it would crack my ribs. I could see the flicker in her eyes, the satisfaction of someone who believed they were about to destroy me publicly. She turned toward the curious faces leaning in phones, already raised to catch whatever spectacle she was about to create. Brittany, don't. I managed my throat tight, but she only tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, Sarah, you don't want to deprive everyone of the truth, do you? Her thumb hovered over the play button. Marcus moved to stand beside me, close enough that I felt the steadiness of his breath, but he didn't reach for her or try to stop her. He understood I needed to face this. The music faded as the DJ lowered the volume, sensing the shift, the tension stretching like a wire ready to snap. I could see people gathering, some pretending to sip drinks, while they stared, others openly holding their phones up to record. Brittany pressed play. The screen glowed, and my own tear-streaked face appeared, voice shaking as I spoke. It was a recording from months ago, when everything in me was crumbling, and I was sitting on the edge of my bed, hair messy, eyes hollow. I gave up everything for this family. My voice crackled from the phone, and it's like I'm invisible to them. Gasps echoed the video, reverberating in the quiet room. I felt like I was standing outside my own body, watching my worst moment become entertainment for people who never bothered to ask how I was surviving back then. Brittany's grin widened. See, she said, turning to the crowd. She's always been dramatic, always making herself the victim. My knees threatened to buckle, but I locked them, forcing myself to keep breathing. Marcus's hand hovered near mine, not grabbing just there if I needed it. Then the video continued, and Brittany's confident smirk faltered. On the screen, her voice cut in careless, dripping with contempt. As long as she keeps paying Dad's medical bills and covering Mom's mortgage, we don't need to give her credit. Let her think she's useful. The room went dead silent. Brittany's hand flew to the phone, fumbling as if she could snatch the words back. Her eyes darted to the guests who were no longer laughing. Some people exchanged looks of disgust. Others turned their gaze on me, their expressions shifting from pity to something like respect. Turn it off, Brittany snapped, but it was too late. The DJ killed the music completely, leaving only the soft hum of the lights and the buzzing of people's notifications as they filmed every second. The moment was locked and irreversible. I felt tears prick my eyes, but this time they weren't from shame. I lifted my chin, my voice ringing clear. You used me. All of you did. But today, that ends. Brittany's face drained of color as she glanced at the faces around her. She opened her mouth, but the words caught dying before they could form. People stepped back from her, creating a circle of isolation where her confidence once lived. I felt lighter, as if the years of being everyone's silent support had finally cracked open to let the truth out. It wasn't neat, and it wasn't quiet, but it was mine, and no one could twist it again. Marcus leaned closer, his voice low enough only I could hear. They can't take your truth from you. I turned my eyes to him, grateful, feeling a strength settle into me that had nothing to do with who was watching or what they thought. Around us, the whispers grew, but this time they weren't about my failures or weaknesses. They were about the family's lies, the manipulation that had finally been exposed for what it was. I saw Brittany's shoulders slump as she clutched her phone like a lifeline that had betrayed her. Some guests put down their phones. Others shook their heads, whispering, I didn't know, and can you believe she said that? I took a breath, letting the air fill me, letting the truth of what had just happened settle into my bones. This wasn't just another humiliation to swallow. It was a moment of reclaiming a moment where the power shifted, and they all knew it. Brittany wasn't the victor here. I was. And then Marcus stepped forward, taking the microphone from the DJ's uncertain hand. The cord stretched as he stepped closer to where I stood, my chest tight, my arms cold, even in the heat of the crowded room. He didn't look at Brittany or at the family first. He looked at me. His voice, when it came, was soft, but it cut through the whispers and the low hum of the air vents like glass. You don't know me, he said, sweeping his gaze across the family, the neighbors, the curious colleagues of Jessica's who came for a free meal and a chance to gossip. But I know her. Marcus turned back to me, a small nod, a silent check if I wanted this. For the first time in a long time, I didn't want to hide. She helped me, he said, turning again to the crowd. When my daughter was sick and the bills piled higher than hope, when I was holding her hand in a hospital room and praying for one more day, she was there. She made sure we didn't lose our home, that I didn't lose everything, and she did it without asking for thanks or recognition. A ripple went through the room. Brittany let out a strangled sound, but Marcus didn't pause. He kept going, quiet, relentless. She didn't tell you because it wasn't about appearances or praise. It was about helping someone who needed it, even when her own family wouldn't help her. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face drained of color, and he looked at the floor. I saw Jessica stiffen her fingers, tightening on Brad's arm, who suddenly seemed very interested in the pattern of the carpet. And you, Marcus said, turning to Brittany, now his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. You used her kindness, her silence, her willingness to sacrifice as a weapon to keep her small, to keep her quiet. The crowd was so quiet, I could hear the clink of a fork dropped somewhere in the back. Someone whispered, "Is that true?" And someone else, "How could they do that?" Brittany's eyes were wide wet, her lips trembling. It was a misunderstanding. "No," Marcus said calmly. "It was a choice." He held out his hand to me, not like a rescuer, not like a savior, but like an equal, like someone who knew what it meant to walk through fire and still find the strength to stand. I hesitated, then slipped my hand into his, feeling the warmth, the steadiness, the promise that I wasn't alone, that I didn't have to shrink for them anymore. "May I have this dance?" Marcus asked, his eyes gentle, but there was a challenge in them, a promise that this was more than a dance. I nodded, tears sliding down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. They weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of release, of relief, of reclaiming. He led me to the dance floor, and the DJ, after a shaky moment, started a slow, soft song. We moved together not as lovers, but as allies, as two people who had nothing left to hide. Around us, people watched, some with their hands over their mouths, some with tears, some clapping softly as the realization of what they had witnessed settled in. I caught sight of Brittany stepping back, her shoulders caving in, her face red and blotchy, as she turned away from the looks of disgust around her. My mother opened her mouth, maybe to speak, maybe to apologize, but I shook my head gently and she fell silent. My father couldn't meet my eyes. We kept dancing, slow, deliberate, the weight of years lifting with each step. Marcus leaned in, his voice only for me. "You were never invisible, Sarah. They just refused to see you." I let out a breath I'd been holding for far too long, the ache in my chest loosening. "Thank you," I whispered. "You don't owe them silence anymore," he replied, pulling back enough so I could see the sincerity in his eyes. As the song drew to a close, the clapping grew louder, and I looked around, seeing faces I'd known all my life, seeing me truly for the first time. Some would turn away, some would pretend this never happened. But I didn't care. I stood taller as the music faded, letting the quiet of the room settle around me. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting them back in. It was about letting myself step forward without dragging their judgment behind me like a chain. I once thought family meant letting yourself be a race to keep the peace. I said softly, not to Marcus, not to them, but to myself. But sometimes peace comes when you finally let them see who you are and walk away if they refuse to accept it. Marcus squeezed my hand, the crowd parting, as we stepped off the floor. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep your family from falling apart, only to realize you were the one falling apart instead? Tell me your story in the comments. I read everyone.